So welcome back, everyone. This is Ira Wolf, and back for another live stream with my guest, Stephen Shapiro. We were chatting right before the show. We were connected about 10 years ago, and life has a funny way of kind of recycling us, or back. We've stayed connected, but we've had a little bit of a history there, and it's funny things how crises and change, innovation, differences. Bring us back together. So welcome, Stephen.
Hey, it's great to be here, Ira. Thanks for having me.
Good. Now, hey, thanks. And it's also pretty appropriate when I saw that you released your new book just a few weeks ago, Invisible Solutions. We'll get that up here in a second. But your Invisible Solutions, you had a really novel way of introducing it on LinkedIn. You were introducing some people that had some pretty incredible solutions and founders. So I was following that a little bit, reached out to you. Appreciate your responding and being willing to do this. But my initial intent was what really, obviously I love the approach. Excited about how you look at not just innovation, but solving problems. I've always been fascinated by that and always looked at a lot of different ways: creativity, curiosity, critical, problem solving. Been certified in a couple of different programs like that. But it's obviously hit the forefront these past few days. Interesting to note within your Invisible Solutions, I remember a book about, I don't know how long ago, 15, 20 years ago. Was it by John Miller about questions, get better questions type thing? And I remember it was on every airport. It was doing when I was doing a lot of traveling and things, and it was in every airport. Is that it's you have to ask better questions. So when I saw Invisible Solutions come up, it was like cool. And then about 15 years ago, I went back to school, got my master's in leadership and ethics, and one of the books was called Prepared Mind, and it was about how to ask better questions, and I found it fascinating. And it sort of helped me reshape working with clients, how they interview, how they should interview better, uh, how some people but you really want to get the answers, what it was. So when I initially thought you'd be on board, it's like wanted to approach how can companies tackle talent acquisition? What's a better approach? Because obviously a lot of things that they're doing today aren't working well. So I was going to frame it around that. And then also, just helping people become better interviewers, better screeners, and talk about that as far as innovation, because every company is looking for ways to grow. But since we got scheduled about 2 or 3 weeks ago, there's obviously a lot of change going on. So let's talk about that. But let's take a step back. I listened to your interview with Mitch Joel. I think it was just the other day, or maybe it was just released the other day.
It was just released, yes.
Yeah. Okay. So and he gave a little bit background of how why you decided to write Invisible Solutions. You had a prior book. I'm going to blow the title here, but it was about best practices suck or something.
that was one of the considered titles. It's actually Best Practices Are Stupid.
Yeah. Okay. So that the adult version of that. And again, I mean, I face that every single day with companies saying, that we just went through a course or we just read this research and they said, here's the best practices and who else do you work with and what other clients, what are other clients doing? And, they may have worked for them, but they don't work for other people. So I'm going to turn it over to you for a few minutes there. I've been doing a lot of talking, a lot of prep on this. But what's, how did you get to Invisible Solutions? I know it was a little bit of a journey. And what took you away from best practices are stupid?
Well, and I don't think I ever left best practices are stupid. In fact, what
I
happened was
still are, right?
when I first launched that book, I submitted the manuscript for that book in it was March 2011. 2011 is when I submitted the manuscript in March. And what I soon realized is when I started having people who were doing early reviews of the book, they really liked the book. But there's one thing that really stuck with them is there was a section in there, a relatively small section, but there's still a section in there about the need to ask better questions. And I talked a little bit about it. So they knew why it needed to happen and what needed to happen, but they didn't know the how. And so what I decided to do is I was going to embark on a journey to create a toolkit to actually systematize the way that people can ask better questions. And these aren't just like, you know, made up types of questions. These aren't sort of generic types of questions. These are very purposefully used ways of reframing a problem statement. And that's, so the past 10 years almost, I've spent my time really focused on how can we create a systematic approach for reframing problems. And that ultimately became the book.
Yeah, and I love that. And again, that's I guess the first time that I spent I guess that I was formally trained on reframing better questions. It's usually been what questions should we ask, and I go, oh yeah, I like that. And then when I entered this business, my first office was in a Sandler's training office, and I wasn't doing sales training. That was never my intent. But they were looking to take sales training to professionals, and they had a process, and like a lot of other sales process, it's a sales process, and sometimes that's all people need is just a process. But as I sat in there and I listened to some of the way they framed their questions, the way they asked questions, um, I immediately resonated back to, or I immediately applied that to interviewing and performance management and how you do performance evaluations and the questions that people asked, and a lot of times trainers would say, well, you just don't ask leading questions, don't ask questions people can give a yes or no. So you have to ask when, what, where, how type things. But even in that, sometimes the wording, it just you got answers that you wanted to hear and not necessarily that gave you any insights. And then again, in the prepared mind, I mean, the one question that I still remember, and I still ask this in interviewing when people say, I say, what don't we know that we should know? And that may not, to you, I'd love to throw that out to you and say, is that even a reasonable question? But from an approach, is that okay? We got all these suggestions, we've got all these ideas, we've got all these solutions in front of us. What are we missing?
Yeah, and first of all, let's just step back for a moment because you said we've got all these ideas. I'm not a fan of ideas.
Right.
Ideas are a
As soon
dime
as
a
I said
dozen.
that, I knew where that was at.
So because one of the things is, everybody has an opinion, suggestion, or idea, and one of the mistakes that people make is they say, well, how would how would you make the company better, or how would you deal with this situation? And then you're going to get hundreds or thousands of ideas. So I'm not a big fan of ideas because they just create a lot of wasted energy in the system. But it's interesting that you said, what don't we know? Because the book itself is called Invisible Solutions, but the subtitle is 25 Lenses That Reframe and Help Solve Difficult Business Problems. Those 25 lenses are 25 different ways that you can reframe a problem. In the early versions of the book, I have more than 25 lenses. There's actually a whole library of them, but one of them was the, what don't we know lens? Because I think that is an important question. We decided to swap it out for another one, which was a little more universal. But that's a great question to always ask. And there's some fascinating research that's been done in terms of just asking that one question as a way of generating some interesting insights.
Excellent. So let's put this to make this real super practical because there's a lot of people on edge today. Everybody's looking for answers, and even in my in the promotion for this, I said people are craving answers, and they're just turn on any media, and everybody's asking all these questions, and a lot of them are pretty lame, and they're the same questions, and you get answers, but they're not necessarily helping us solve the problem. So we got to, we're whether they're everybody's looking for what's the best approach, what's the best solutions we can put on the table, and again it goes back to how can individuals reframe that. So where's the
Right.
place to start? What's the first place that people can go right now to be able to do that, other than buying your book?
Yeah, so I think the first thing is just to recognize that having the answers isn't the answer, because a lot of times we're answering the wrong question. And if you're answering the wrong question, no matter how much energy you put into it, it will never yield the right answer. So the whole premise is to find better solutions. We need to step back and make sure we're solving the right problem. And I think that's why people are scrambling around right now. I need ideas. I need ideas. I need answers. I need answers. It's like, to what? To what? What's the question? What's the problem? What's the opportunity that we are focusing on? And how do we maybe tweak it slightly? And I've been applying the lenses to my business because, I make my living for the most part on the road giving speeches. Well, as you can imagine, it's not a good time to be a speaker. But for me, it's interesting because this has given me some huge opportunities when I've taken the time to step back and stop looking at it from the lens of this is a big problem, but rather what's the opportunity that underlies everything that's going on here.
That's for the people that can as well. But that's important. I mean, and I'm looking at the same thing, and I've always sought challenges and crises. We had a speaker last week that looked at every crisis as an opportunity to grow. What are those opportunities out there? So in line with that, you gave a lot of good examples. I encourage you to go out and get it. One is, and I know you do this in your keynotes a lot, about the baggage, about airline baggage, about the airlines. I think that just hits home. Everybody understands it. Most people have flown on a plane. Most people have had these delays. So share that with the listeners, and we can lead into some of the other ones that are more relevant, and then even let's move into what questions. How can we reframe the questions that we're asking today?
Yeah, absolutely. So I know that the airline industry is suffering a little bit right now. So talking about air travel is maybe not the greatest thing, but basically, and here's this very, very short version of the story. Airport here in the US, passengers are complaining it took too long for their bags to arrive. Because let's face it, you get off the plane, last thing you want to do is sit at baggage claim and wait. But that's what we do. So they did some analysis. They found that it took 15 to 20 minutes for the bags to arrive from basically the time that the cargo doors open on the plane till the bags started rolling onto the carousels. So they decided to solve the problem. How can we speed up the bags? How can we speed up the bags? And so they spent a ton of money on faster conveyor belts, more baggage handlers, newer technology. They got it from 15 to 20 minutes down to 8 to 10 minutes. Now, I already know how this works. You improve a process by 50%, you are happy, but the passengers still weren't happy. So they realized they couldn't make the bags go any faster. And fortunately, they had an epiphany. And the epiphany was this. It took the bags 8 to 10 minutes to get from the plane to the baggage carousel, but it only took the passengers 1 to 3 minutes to get from the plane to the baggage carousel. So instead of speeding up the bags, they decided to slow down the passengers. And they literally reconfigured the airport so that it would take on average 8 to 10 minutes for the passengers to get from the plane to the baggage carousel. They get to the baggage carousel, their bags are waiting. And to me, it's a very powerful demonstration of how shifting the question yields different solutions. For example, if you think about this, they were really trying to solve the problem of wait time. How can we reduce wait time when they solved only one part of wait time? Because speed of the bags is not the same as the wait time. Wait time is the speed of the bags and the speed of the passengers. And the point is, most people spend all their time trying to speed up bags. They don't think to slow down passengers. And we can dig really, really deep into this example because there's some great ways of just substituting a couple of words to get completely different answers. So instead of reducing wait time, how do we improve the wait experience? That's a completely different question, but we've only changed 2 words. The questions we ask have just a profound impact on the range of solutions we're going to consider, and we don't take enough time to think about that.
So you also gave another example, and again, I think when there's crisis moments, and it didn't affect everyone like this, and it wasn't a global problem, but you gave an example of the Deep Horizon about 10, 11 years ago, I guess it was, maybe more. And again, there was the challenge, and I found this really interesting. Going back to your in here as well, uh, three, um, when they got out to deal with the oil that was just flowing, you said that there was over 123,000 suggestions that were received. None of them helped solve the problem.
Right.
But by reframing the question, they found the solution.
Well, in this situation, they didn't reframe the question to find the solution, but I use this as an illustration of what most organizations do is they ask big, broad, abstract questions. So when they asked, how do we stop the flow of oil? They got 123,000 solutions, as you pointed out. It was solved in a completely different way because they were asking the wrong question. That's really the whole point is when we ask people big, broad, abstract questions, we invite a lot of wasted energy and irrelevant thinking, but we don't take the time to deconstruct, to break down a problem into its more fundamental elements so that we have a chance of actually finding a solution. So the questions become so important and we don't take enough time because we tend to want to jump to solutions very quickly.
So, I mean, so again, we're just before we went on the air, there was a whole bunch of new announcements, including that our president actually came in direct contact with somebody who had the coronavirus on over the weekend. So there's, I mean, every minute we're faced with this avalanche of new information in the problem, and people just want answers. What should we do? And one of the answers is that we should basically we need to isolate ourselves. We need to quarantine everybody. Everybody needs to stop what they're doing. In fact, there was a big Atlantic article about that. Just cancel everything. Just cancel everything. How would we? How would you advise our leaders and our individuals? What questions? How do we need to reframe the questions we're asking right now to hopefully get better outcomes?
Yeah, so I'd like to just step back for a moment because one of the things that I find is so common inside of organizations when they're trying to solve problems, when they're trying to innovate, is they like to fight constraints. So when I work with companies that are in financial services, which is a highly regulated industry, they're like, we could do so much more if it weren't for the regulators. And what happens is we spend so much energy trying to fight the reality of constraints when in fact constraints are our friend and can be our friend. So when we look at a situation like we have right now, where there are travel bans, when people aren't holding meetings, we can fight it and say, this is the end of the world. And, we need to somehow fight back. But instead, the best thing you can do is say, hey, these are the constraints. How do I innovate inside these constraints? And one of the things that I do talk a lot about is why the brain actually loves constraints. When you embrace constraints, they actually help you find better solutions. So in this situation, for example, one of the lenses in the book is the conflicts lens. Well, we have a lot of conflict right now. The conflicts might be something like, how do I hold meetings when people can't travel? Or how do I do business when we can't actually meet them face to face? These are conflicts that we need to find resolutions to. But if we take the time to do that, we actually find some really interesting, fascinating solutions. And so in my business right now, I fought it for a while. Every day I'd get a call. This speech is canceled. Oh, they're not moving forward with this event. This has been postponed. And for a while, I thought it was like, this is the worst thing. And what I realized recently is I'm doing what everybody else does. I'm fighting the constraints. I'm now embracing the constraints. And I launched 7 new programs just yesterday. These are things I've been working on, never launched them. I launched them in one day. This is something I should have done 2 years ago for all these programs. That to me is the key, is that when you embrace it, you get action. And, for me, all of this is about survival of the adaptable. It's not survival of the fittest. Darwin never said that. It's survival of the adaptable. Those who adapt to the new realities are the ones who will survive. And that's the opportunity for all of us, is to adapt to the new realities, at least as it exists at this moment.
Well, I mean, I'm starting around that, for a bit, is one of those solutions that and again, so we're sitting here reframing the question, and I think I wrote down one, and again, let's be practical. It's one of the things that we have is how can we stop the coronavirus from spreading? Heard that, And then the other is, how can we prevent people from getting sick? Okay, what's the, how would you handle that? I mean, you hear these two questions coming out all the time. I mean, you talk about the conflict reframing, but there's 20, well, there's more than 24 other ones. But what would your approach be for people to, and again, maybe even more realistic, is what should people be doing in their business? Is it simply, should we cancel the event, or is there a better question?
Yeah, my guess is there's a better question. It would take a little bit of time to focus on that. But I think what ends up happening is we state certain things as like one of the lenses is the concern reframe, which basically says we state things as though they are facts. Like we don't have time, we don't have money, we can't travel. But maybe the concern reframe basically says take something that we state as fact that may not be fact and reframe it so that it becomes a question. So let's just use the one about money. Instead of saying we don't have enough money, well, how can we get more money? Or how can we do it for less money? Or if it's about time, how can we do it for less time? So, the fact we're stating things like we can't travel, we can't talk to people, we can't be in social environments, but maybe that's not the right question. It's like, how can we be in social environments with being protected? Or how can we travel and be safe? So it doesn't, and I'm not saying those are necessarily the right questions. None of these lenses give you the right question, but they give you different ways to look at a problem. Exactly. And so the answer has always been, okay, we're suspending the NBA for the rest of the year. Okay, well, that's interesting, but is there another way to do it? How can we look at the problems and see if there's a different way to look at it? Like in my business, what I'm saying is, okay, what am I going to reduce and eliminate from my business that's now going to free up new opportunities for me? And I think there's a great time for companies to ask a similar question is, what are you going to stop doing that's not going to hurt the business, but actually is going to propel the business because now you have resources to focus on other bigger, larger, better opportunities?
So let's talk about that a little bit. So, you and I are of the mindset that we're looking for opportunities. We're looking, and we've both talked about there were things that we both should have done. We both been working on things to offer more digital offerings, and we haven't, because now we need a tipping point, and now we're prepared. A lot of other companies maybe we're just talking about they're not prepared, but going forward, what are some of what are some of the things, or what are, rather than sitting down and complaining about that we're losing sales and people and meetings are getting canceled, what are some specific things people can do? What are some, let me take it this way. You have 25, in your book, you've got 25 different frames or lenses that we can look through. What are some of the common ones that someone could identify with and start looking through? What are some of the, I guess, the most common frames that people either miss or use incorrectly?
Well, I think I'll just choose two just at random, but they're two that I really like. And I've had some conversations with some companies that have had some very complex challenges, and these two worked really, really well. One is the variations lens. The variations lens says that we don't want one-size-fits-all solutions. And the premise of it is that you do not ever design to handle, or you never design for an exception, you design to handle the exception. And so what happens is we take our most complex situation, our most complex case, and we design everything around that, as opposed to saying, we're going to design everything around the most common case. What's the thing that happens most frequently? Design to optimize that, and then we'll handle the exception, even if it costs a lot more. And when we've used those approaches, it really yields some very fascinating solutions. And I think right now what we're dealing with is we're using this one-size-fits-all, cancel everything approach, as opposed to saying, well, maybe there's a variation. Maybe in some situations we do have face-to-face meetings. And I'm not saying that's the right answer, because I'm not giving answers. But if you start thinking about the questions, what are the variations? What are the different ways we can handle this? How do we create environments where we have more intimate settings, more large settings? Those variations, I think, open up some new opportunities. The other one, which I really like, is the resequence. And I'm not sure how this applies to this situation. I have to spend a little time thinking about it, but it's about timing. And what's happening is, basically, when it comes to timing, you have typically three options. You have one which is predicting, one is postponing, and one is doing things in parallel. In a lot of cases, we make the assumption that we have to wait till something, wait until some decision is made, until we have certain amounts of information before we make decisions. And I think sometimes postponing slows down businesses. We're right now in a wait and see environment. What can we predict? What are the things that we have some level of certainty over that we can start making some decisions today? Even in this environment of ambiguity, there are some decisions we still can start making. How can we resequence so that those predictions allow us to make some action moving forward? And then how can we do certain things in parallel so that we're getting some traction even when we feel like we're not moving forward?
Excellent. And that's great. So, hey, I just got somebody else that said that my sound was a little low. Let me just try to do a quick adjustment here on the fly. I don't know if that's any better. Is that? I don't know.
I didn't notice the difference on my end, but
okay, we'll try it that way. So, let me see. So, what's next? I mean, what can you suggest? Again, everybody's sort of in a panic, and we need to kind of take a deep breath. Yesterday on my podcast, we talked about somebody. Our talk was about mindfulness. So, and meditate, just taking a step back and taking a deep breath. This is a great opportunity for people to move forward and, certainly go back and read about invisible solutions. But, what are some, you're going to be spending some time, focusing on your digital. This is a good time. I mean, when we come out of this, companies are going to still struggle with finding people. There's still going to be a shortage of people with skills, probably more so. Because, again, people are going to be more selective of what the future is going to look like. You identified it. I identified it in my book, World Economic Forum, identified that critical thinking, creativity, problem solving, huge skills. I like the way you frame it. You called it something else rather than complex.
Yeah, so the World Economic Forum said that the number one skill that people need to have,
problem formulation.
Yes, is complex problem solving. But from my perspective, it's all about complex problem formulation. I really do believe that the answer to our questions doesn't lie in the answer. It actually is about the question, and formulating the question is so important. So I just think that's fundamentally critical for everything that we're dealing with right now. And I think it's also, like I said, stepping back and breathing a little bit, because we do have a natural, innate human wiring for survival. And what survival does is it means we're going to be making snap decisions that could move us in the wrong direction. And in many cases, because of survival, we repeat what we've done in the past, because what we've done in the past didn't kill us. So we figure it's safer to do what we've done previously rather than try something new. But this is the opportunity. This is the time. This is the time to make some bigger investments. One of the things which I love is one of the companies that I studied for a number of years. It was a privately held company. And their belief was that when the economy tanks, when there are crises and things of that nature, instead of pulling back like everyone else is, that's when they double down. Because from their perspective, if no one else is making investments and they start doubling down on their investments, they will pay off much larger. So this is actually, as tough as it is, we need to just breathe a little bit. We need to make sure we're, putting our energies where we're going to get the greatest results, and recognize that if we continue to move forward, this is actually a potentially great time for opportunity down the line, even if it's painful in the process.
Yeah, excellent. There was a question and it keeps kind of going in and out of my mind, and I just lost it again. Where we go next. But again, it's with this opportunity that sits in front of us. I know what it was. And this was part of it, and then maybe this will be one of our closing questions. There's one of the things that paralyzes people with whatever it is seems to be that we make lots of assumptions. We rely on past experiences. So in looking at reframing this, looking at opportunity, people get it. They're going to take this opportunity, they're going to take a deep breath, and they're going to sit back. But assumptions are going to paralyze people. You're going to hear somebody that won't work, or we tried that before. What's your how do we work through assumptions?
I think, first of all, just acknowledging that we do make assumptions is important.
Okay.
My big belief is that expertise is the enemy of innovation. And what I mean by that is our past experiences put blinders on us that limit our ability to see new possibilities in the future. Now, the key to taking off the blinders is to recognize that the blinders are there. Just because you knew your customers, your industry, and your competition doesn't mean you still know them, because things change. As we are seeing, things can change rapidly. So I think that's just really important to just step back and acknowledge we make assumptions, write down your assumptions, like we always do it this way, or we've never done it this way, or this is how we currently do it. And then just ask yourself, what if all that's wrong? What if our beliefs are wrong? Now, the lenses are designed to help you actually challenge those assumptions, because every time you, as Mark Twain would call it, a mental kaleidoscope, every time you turn the kaleidoscope, you see something new. That's what the lenses do, is they give you 25 different turns of a kaleidoscope to look at a problem through a different angle, through a different lens. That helps you challenge assumptions. So the key is to just recognize we make assumptions, we need to be aware of it, we need to challenge it, and then we need to be open to new directions.
So, Stephen, we've been on the line about a half hour. I try to keep our conversations within that pretty this framework, because everybody's got a busy time, and I watch people fall on and fall off, and especially today, probably a billion distractions going on.
I would imagine.
Yeah. How can people get a hold of you? And what are some next steps? I've got your your website lying underneath, but what are some other ways, and how can they get a hold of your book?
Sure. So the easiest way to find the book is invisiblesolutionsbook.com. That'll give you, there's videos, there's resources, and everything else that you can find from there. So just, go to invisiblesolutionsbook.com, and you'll be able to, if you want, download the 25 lenses. You can actually start playing with them and start to use them in your business now without even having to buy the book.
So, and I'll point out, because I went up to invisiblesolutions.com. It's not your site.
That's not me.
It's invisiblesolutions.book.com.
Right.
So, excellent. Hey, Stephen, it's great to see you again. I'm not sure if we actually ever saw each other, because 10 years ago we probably weren't doing live streams and FaceTimes. But I know we've talked and been a big fan of yours and followers, so I appreciate you taking the time to be here. And very, very appropriate time. Sometime I'd love to get back when we get back to normal, which may never be ever. We'll continually see the shift, but talk about how your approach might be used in talent acquisition, talent experience, and employee experience, which are big buzzes in our world these days. So.
Fantastic. Well, I would love to be back, and I just wish everyone well, and hopefully this is a good time to step back and make some investments in your business.
Yeah, and continued success with the book. Again, for anybody who's not connected with you, I highly suggest it. I love I don't know if I saw him recently, but I know you were out to do those invisible solutions, like highlight an individual each week or each day. They were fascinating, some of the people. And again, it helps you relate to people who have challenged the system.
Yes.
Who have ignored some of their assumptions, and especially when we get back to innovating and growing again, when our heads get out of the wherever they are these days, that'll be a big help. So hey, I appreciate it. Have a great day. Just a quick reminder to everybody, got some live streams coming up next week. We've got Geeks, Geezers, and Googleization every Wednesday, 1 p.m. on w4cy.com. So you can get the podcast. We're obviously talking a lot about the crisis and how to crisis management, reputation management, innovation, growth, and we'll continue to do that and try to bring you the best experts that are out there. And if you want to keep tabs on it, I'm not sure where my banner is here, but you can get updates by going to googlizationnation.com. Let me just see. I know it's a big word. There it is. So you can see it on the banner in the bottom. You can join googlizationnation.com. It's our community, and you'll get updates before and after, or for podcasts and live streams like this. So everybody, take a deep breath, go back, think, reframe your questions, ask better questions, read read Stephen's book, Invisible Solutions, and visit his website for some free resources. Thanks very much, everybody. Take care.